Welcome to another episode of Resetology, where conversations revolve around changing from the inside out. I'm here today with Jeff and Julie to have a discussion about the importance of being present in relationships. Let's jump right in.
All of us like to work out, each of us in our own way. For me, it's the Peloton at home. Carissy, I don't know, you like to go to the gym. Jeff, are you still doing your martial arts stuff?
When my old man injuries permit.
Well, there's one phrase that the Peloton instructors use that really resonates with me and I think is really relatable for our conversation today, which is that the hardest part of the workout is just showing up. And for me, that is so true because once I get going, then I can enjoy it. I can have fun with the music. But just getting the motivation to actually show up is really hard sometimes. And I think
So are hamstring curls, though.
yes. Yeah, that's true. Actually doing the work is hard too. I think that for relationships, the hardest part of them is showing up as well. You know, sometimes we know that someone's going through a hard situation and it's awkward. It's, we don't know what to say to them. We're afraid of making things worse. We think, in our minds, we tell ourselves a story that they just want to be left alone. They don't want anybody to bother with them. Sometimes we're dealing with our own feelings as well about the situation where maybe we're upset and we don't want to transfer that to them. So we just stay isolated. But that's where it's important to just show up and to be present. So I know we're planning to talk about that and kind of unpack that today, but I wanted to hear from you guys. When is it hard to show up? When have you found it hard and maybe you should be present for someone, maybe you should show up, but it's hard?
I think the hard part is feeling like you have to have something wise to say or you have to have an answer or a solution. For me, it's gotten easier when I realized that showing up means very low volume of words. But it used to be really hard for me to show up when I felt like I had to say something wise or comforting because it's too much pressure. When stuff's complex and hard, there aren't easy fixes.
Yep.
Yeah, for me, it's depletion. I mean, any bona fide introvert out there like me will know that you re-energize by being alone and pursuing your interests alone. That's what energizes you. But for my fellow introverts who work, in people jobs, we spend a lot of that energy working with people. And I work very, very much in a people job, moving people, motivating people to do things they don't want to do constantly.
Yeah.
And then nights and weekends, I do bivocational ministry. So I'm with people all the time. And it's hardest to show up when I'm really far into a particular season, like the school year, for example. The deeper the school year goes, I have very little time to re-energize. And again, any introvert will tell you, that's how you re-energize. Your alone time where you can pursue your interests alone. And, despite critiques from non-introverts who say, no, that's not true. No, it's very true.
Yeah.
For introverts, it's totally true. So that's when it's hardest for me to show up because I have depleted all my energy on people and I've just got nothing left to give.
Yeah, I think my mom taught me the lesson that, people always remember who shows up for those big milestone moments like weddings and funerals. People remember who was there and who wasn't there, even if they're in their fog of either the joy or the grief of the moment. Last summer, my husband's nephew died, and we were planning to go and be with the family because, we knew he was really struggling with cancer. And he passed away before we had a chance to get down there. So we changed our plan to fly down there. And, I was conscious because I feel like, as an American going to Latin America, I feel like a high maintenance guest. And so I was very conscious about that. Are we really going to add value by being there? But we were able to accompany his brother's family to do things like, pick up the ashes and, to have those late night conversations with them, reviewing, what had happened and asking those questions and getting them to tell those stories. And, jet lag and all, it paid off to be present for them. But I can definitely relate, thinking do I have anything to give or am I just going to be a burden to them for being there? I think it's also hard when we can't fix the situation, right? He had already passed away. There's nothing else we could do at that point. And so, to know that we were going just simply to be present and we literally could do nothing else
Mhm.
besides be present, it was hard. So I'm curious to know if you have had a situation where you really needed someone to show up and they did. They actually came through for you and their presence made a difference.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of examples that I could give. If I go back to my earliest memory of that, probably 10 days before my 16th birthday, one of my best friends on my basketball team actually got shot and murdered.
Oh, no.
So I remember getting the phone call really early in the morning. It was another teammate, and it was shocking. It was the first time I experienced death, and of course, it was a young death. She
Yeah.
was a very good friend, and then I'm from a small town in Iowa. People don't get murdered, and so it was just so heavy and so complex. And I remember the school year starting up that fall, and I was grieving so much. I didn't know what to do with grief, and
Mm-hmm.
I was a stuffer, and so
Yep.
I just kind of stuffed and didn't really talk to people. And my friend who was my age, so 16 at the time, it was volleyball season. And I remember we were warming up for volleyball. We were at an away game, and I was looking up at the banners that were hanging there for the schools in the conference. And I said to her, I just have a memory of Tara at every single one of those schools. My 16-year-old friend, young friend, I just remember her saying, well, tell me a memory from each school.
Oh, wow.
And I just started sharing with her. The fact that I even remember that
Mm-hmm.
decades later shows that it had an impression on me. And what a
Definitely.
incredible thing for a 16-year-old to do. She let me talk because she wasn't really friends with her. But it's a beautiful experience to just get some of that out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to share your memories. That's
Right.
yeah. For me, an example of when someone showed up for me was when I was going through a transition in at work, and I needed to just have that encouragement to get through that season as I was going from one job to another and into a new company. My parents and a friend were there for me to just talk at the end of the day and process what I was learning, how things were going, and to just keep me encouraged so that I wouldn't just be in my own head with my own thoughts and that you can get the self-doubt going on. So just helping me to overcome that. Have you ever had the opposite scenario where you've been going through something and you wish that someone had showed up for you, or in hindsight, you think it would have been easier to have a friend walking with you, but you didn't at that time? And what was that like?
I can't think of like a specific memory. And I think a couple things come to mind, though, generally speaking. One is for so long, I was so bad about inviting people into that hard space that
Mm-hmm.
I think it was hard for people to be present for me because I wasn't letting them into my world, that I was
Yeah.
going through something hard or that I was stuck in grief or, whatever difficult emotion. And so it was hard for people to do that for me.
Mm-hmm.
But the other just kind of generality that I think fits here is I just don't like it when people say, "You know what you should do?"
Oh my gosh.
You're
Yes, that's the worst.
like as if you haven't thought of every
Mm-hmm.
scenario. And it's like, because when you're stuck and it's heavy, it's really complex.
Yes.
And so for someone to just breeze in and they've listened for 5 minutes and go, "You know what you should do? Have you tried this?" It's like, yeah. And then
Yeah.
it gets you all dysregulated even more. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like a pile on. What about you, Jeff?
I remember these times more than the time something came through.
Okay, that
Uh,
surprises me because as
uh,
an introvert, you would think that you would want to be isolated, but no, introverts need support too.
Fair point, yeah. I'm also a brooder. I think a lot of introverts are brooders too.
Mhm.
But I remember I had this creative writing professor in college, and she said for some reason we tend to remember the bad things way more than the good things.
mhm.
And when it comes to someone not showing up, I want to take this in a slightly different direction, but it comes back right to the
Mhm.
path. It's like my dad died when I was 12. And one of my earliest memories is my mom and dad sitting me down, telling me I had cancer. I didn't know what cancer was at the time, but I knew it was bad. So I've got a lot of memories of him just being super dad despite being in pain and always setting time aside in the evenings to, wrestle with the kids and stuff.
Mhm.
Even though he's like wincing and grimacing. So he passed away when I was 12. And then it wasn't until I was 28 that I was actually mad about it.
Mhm.
Because I was 28 and going through something else in my life, and then I realized, like, I got cheated out of a lifetime with my dad.
Oh,
Like,
man.
he's never there,
Mhm.
and it's not his fault. Obviously, like, that's not where
Yeah.
I'm going. That's not where the anger is. The anger was never toward my dad, but just towards whatever or whoever that's wrong. That's not right.
Yeah.
And there were just times throughout those 16 years where it would have been great to have, dad there to talk through some things with. So there's that, but then there's also just so many instances, more than I can even recall at any given time, from like 12 years old, just with various people, never mom. Mom's always there. Mom is super mom. Just life has just taught me, I know this sounds cynical, but I'm just being fair and open and honest that no, like people don't give you a fair deal. You cannot trust people. But at the same time, holding that in balance with that doesn't explain everybody. That does not define everybody. Everybody's flawed. I've let people down. I'll totally own my own bias to avoid putting trust in people for things and be as self-reliant as possible.
But the challenge is that you're not building the ties that you need when you really do need someone to be present,
Yeah.
right? Like, you're not taking advantage of the downtime to build
Yeah.
those ties. But I say that, and it's like preaching to myself too, right? Because I absolutely do the same thing. I think I got in the habit of pulling away from a lot of folks when we were going through infertility issues, because it was easier to not socialize with people that were starting to have babies. It was easier to not keep in touch with people that I know would try to encourage me with all kinds of
You know what you should do?
faith-filled, yeah, you know what you should do, which is not the greatest topic for conversation around infertility. But also, like, the faith-related conversations, right? Like, remember so-and-so in the Bible, or, there must be something that's blocking your blessing, which is just, like, heaps condemnation on you, right? And so that was definitely a season when I isolated myself and cut myself off from a lot of potential friendships with a lot of great people, just kind of choosing, kind of getting ahead of that. Um, I recently, I think though, some of it goes back to, the way that you're raised, the way you're trained and socialized to interact with people. And I listened recently to kind of parenting advice for teens, because our daughter's still pretty young as a young adult, but they were talking about how teenagers often will try to talk to you when you're in bed or getting ready for bed, because they know that they're in control of the conversation and that you're not going to try to bring up additional topics because you want to just go to sleep. And so a lot of times, so a lot of times they'll wait.
Jeff's looking at me like, oh, I know someone who also does that.
Yeah.
For me, it's early morning. I love to talk to my husband early morning because he's a night person. So I love to bring stuff up, and he's like, coffee, first coffee.
This explains a lot.
It does. Apparently, it's when I have your full attention.
So we're going for what we need, right? We need that presence and we can kind of shape the circumstances for when we know we're going to get what we need. So I think there's some examples in scripture of people being present for others or not. I mean, Job's comforters is one example that comes to mind. Are there any other examples you guys can think of?
I have one. It's not explicitly in the Bible, but I think we can make some inferences. If you think about Mary and Elizabeth in the Bible, so Elizabeth is the mother of John the Baptist, older, and then Mary, of course, very young, the mother of Jesus. But their story is so interesting because they're both supernatural births, but just like on the other end of the spectrum, Mary's is supernatural in a different way. But I just think about those 3 months where Mary went to Elizabeth and stayed with her. And I just imagine Elizabeth really being present for her. Like this young girl, she's carrying the Messiah and all the fear and the concerns. And I don't know, I might be reading into it too much, but I picture Elizabeth like being really present for her, and probably vice versa. But I think there's something there in that people can really be present with us when they've walked that road and they've gone through it and they're further down the path. Like they get the hurt or the pain or the sorrow, and they can show up a little bit better. And I think it's also important too, when we've gone through hard things, you look back and say, like, where was the Elizabeth? Like, where's the person that God sent? Because she was like a respite for Mary to get out of her city.
Yeah.
And we can usually look back and there was a Elizabeth or sometimes more than one that God sent during hard seasons.
Oh, that's interesting.
Job's friends are obviously good examples of what not to do. But I think of Hannah's husband as well. She dealt with infertility, and then her husband takes on a second wife, and she's popping out babies and heirs and then she's ridiculing Hannah. And what is Hannah's husband's response when Hannah is depressed? Aren't I worth more to you than several sons? It's like, dude, that was the worst thing to say. So, there's
She should have been talking to him late at night.
Yeah, I know. And I think anyone who just reads well, you don't even have to be super biblically literate. You just read well, and that's your response to that. Like, are you kidding me? That's how you respond to your wife when your polygamy is just heaping more and more burdens on her? You've got to be kidding me, dude. You so blew that. But just a good example of what not to do. The best being present is Jesus, and the marks of a person who's just being present is the fruit of the Spirit. I think all of them, in one way, shape, or form, come up in a person who is consistently just present.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the fruit is born of experience, right? Like, I think a lot of times when we go through things, it makes us better equipped to be present for somebody else, or by extension. Like, I imagine it was the case with Elizabeth. Like, Elizabeth, she had children, she had her baby late in life. And so she had so many years of waiting on God, of experiencing probably ridicule herself, misunderstandings. And so she was able to then extend that to Mary and give her the relational nutrients that she needed, which is actually a good transition. Carissa, you talk a lot about the relational nutrients that are involved in being present for other people and how they help with emotional growth. Did you want to walk us through a few of those?
Yeah, these are from the book People Fuel by Dr. Townsend. I just found these really, really helpful to give language to giving these things away in terms of nutrients, just like we need physical nutrients for our body, but we also need emotional nutrients. So we think about these in terms of giving them away, but then also receiving them. The ones that fit in this topic of being present, I think, first of all, it's acceptance, which is connecting without judgment. Because if you don't feel accepted by somebody, you're not going to open up, you're not going to share, you're not going to want to be in relationship with them. And so we have to connect with people without them feeling judged, which doesn't mean that I affirm or agree with you. We can disagree about all kinds of things, but it's just that I'm accepting you as a human being. And then once we feel accepted, we do start sharing. And that gives us an opportunity to provide containment, which I always, make a big circle with my arms and like I'm holding a big bucket and like, okay, just verbal vomit, let it all out. Once someone starts talking, we should start attuning. That word means just tuning in to not just the words, but what's the emotion behind the words. What we're doing is we're leaving our world, our cares, our concerns, what we have to do later that day. We just leave our world and we let ourselves go into their world and try to feel what they're feeling. And that's burden bearing. If we think about Jesus, the incarnation is he left his world and he came to our world. And that's what we're supposed to do when we're being present. I leave my world and I let myself go there. I let myself feel what you're feeling. And people can tell the difference. Like if you're really letting yourself go there. So as we do, we start expressing what we're feeling. Like this is so overwhelming. Like I'm feeling so angry just listening to you. And as we do that, people feel heard and the people feel understood. And then they want to share more. And so we contain more and we attune more.
You know what you're making me think of is when Jesus was with Mary and Martha when Lazarus died, right? That he made space for Mary to cry. And he wept at the death of his friend. So he was present and created that space for Mary. And she received it. She looked for it from him. The opposite response, of course, was Martha, who pushed him away. But he still made space for that too. He made space for both of their responses so that they could move forward and then he could do a miracle in their lives. But first, he knew that what they needed first before the fix was that containment.
Yeah. The next thing is to validate what we're hearing. When someone's sharing the hard parts of their life, their feelings really, really matter. So the last thing we want to do is invalidate. But all of these things together, accepting, containing, attuning, validating, when we do all of these things, eventually someone usually goes, "Oh, I feel so much better." And we really didn't do much because of low volume of words, but we were just present and we gave them the nutrients of comfort.
What I'm hearing is that it's a muscle that we need to develop in ourselves. Like, we need to develop the skills to be able to go through the steps of accepting someone, creating containment, etc. But it's also something to think about creating in an atmosphere of a faith community, right? Where we're thinking about how do we create a safe space so that when we need each other, we're there for each other. And how do we create those relational ties so that we're there for just mutually when we need each other's strength and encouragement. We're there. We've created that foundation of safety. And I think that maybe that's just a different way to think about church, even, or to think about our small groups, or to think about our friendships, as we're sewing into that relationship to be a place of safety, but also how we're sewing into our own character, how we're becoming people that can be safe places.
That's how church is supposed to work. That you have a unique walk with God, and your walk with God should strengthen mine, and mine should strengthen yours. And it's where the individual dimension of faith meets the communal dimension of faith. That's the way it's supposed to be. There should not be any, lone wolf Christians out there. And you used the term microchurch recently, and I thought, I hadn't heard of that term, but that's such a good term for our reset. We've built those communities for 4 years, and there's just more space for people to share when they're struggling with something. A person's personal stuff can both strengthen the group, and if necessary, the group can strengthen a person when they're going through difficult personal stuff.
I'm always inspired by the story of when Jesus was healing the woman with the issue of blood, that he felt virtue leave him, right? He felt virtue come out, leave him. And I think that that's a great way to try to be available to God and to our friends, that as they are going through something, that there can be a virtue that goes out from us to bring healing to them as we become people who are ready to be present for them. That creates a place where that virtue can go, that God can work through us, not in a way of like slapping hands on their forehead so they fall over, but in a way of like, I'm just going to be present for you. And that's where the healing can happen. It's just in being present.
And that's so much of what the body of Christ is supposed to be doing for one another. Because the primary ways that we're wounded are in our family of origin. And so we were in a family and we didn't get what we need. And so now we're in a new family. We're in the family of God. And this family has to know how to give and supply these things, because that's what heals us. If it's damaged in relationship, it should be healed in relationship.
Yeah, a healing, intentional family. So, well, I think my takeaway from the things we've been talking about are the importance of being intentional about building these capabilities and being conscious, almost like a muscle, right? Getting back to the exercise or workout metaphor, to be conscious about strengthening these capabilities so that we create space for God to work through us and for God to create ties with each other, which is how he intended us to be in community together. So, well, thank you for being present for the podcast, and thanks to everyone who's listening. We hope that this helps and encourages you in your journey.
Thank you for listening. We hope this message encouraged you. For additional resources or information on our upcoming events, head to resetministries.us. That's resetministries.us.